Hello and welcome to this Foster Care Institute online training webinar, Ethical Dilemmas Youth Workers Experience with Youth in Care. I'm your host, Dr. John DeGarmo, founder and director of the Foster Care Institute. I am an international speaker and trainer, a best-selling author of several foster parenting books, and most importantly, my wife and I have been foster parents to over 60 plus children who have come to our home and been a part of our family over the years, and many of them have been teens in crisis. I think back to the time that my wife and I had 3 high school seniors in our home at the same time, all seniors from 3 different families, all seniors on very, very different paths, and all seniors in crisis. At the same time, every senior brought some sense of joy and love and enjoyment to our family, and I would never, ever do anything different. Our goal during this webinar is to help you have a better understanding of what ethical dilemmas look like when you work with youth in crisis and youth in the foster care system. Our key objectives include to help you increase your awareness of what ethical dilemmas are and why they are important, and help you understand how to address ethical dilemmas when you work with youth in the foster care system. Now, as we've addressed here so many times at the Foster Care Institute, and as you most likely know, when a teen arrives into a foster care setting, whether it is a traditional foster care home or whether it is a residential or therapeutical group home or setting, when a teen arrives, it's going to be a time of many different emotions. For many teens, it's going to be a time of tremendous anxiety. You can put aside all of the abuse, all of the neglect, all of the trauma that youth has experienced before being placed into the residential home. When a teen comes to the home, it's going to be a great time of anxiety. So many questions. What will it be like here? Will I ever see my family again? Who are the people I'm living with? What are the other teenagers like? Will they hurt me? Will they accept me? Will the staff accept me? Will the staff hurt me or abuse me? Do I have any sense of future? Does anybody love me? And many concerns about their time there and their future, and many fears as well. But for some, that also might be a time of excitement. Excitement as in they might be going living with a home with other teenagers their age, and they might see that as a benefit in their life in some way. Now, make no mistake, when youth are placed into the foster care environment and to the setting, it's going to be a time of tremendous anxiety. And perhaps you've seen it. Perhaps you've seen when youth come to live in the home that you work at, they might have feelings of hopelessness, despair, deep sadness. They might have feelings of anger and resentment. They might have nightmares. They might question everything. They might question authority. They might be argumentative. But most likely they are overwhelmed with feelings and emotions they cannot process or have a difficult time understanding. And again, they are overwhelmed with anxiety. Now, as we know, working with youth in the foster care system, youth in crisis, well, can be challenging in so many ways. So many ways that you probably did not anticipate or expect before you came to work at the home, before you came to work with youth in crisis, before you became to have a lifestyle immersed within youth and foster care system. You probably did not consider or again have a true understanding of what those challenges day in and day out might look like. Well, at the same time, youth workers often face a number of ethical dilemmas as well when working with youth in crisis. Now, ethics in the workplace is generally regarded as being about the norms of behavior, the norms of behavior that people follow regarding what is considered good, what is considered bad, what is considered right, what is considered wrong. And many times, these ethical issues are about matters of personal well being or personal welfare. Now, let's look deeper at ethics at the workplace. Now, ethics in the context of professional practice, or in the workplace, if you will, in this regard, it's all about developing the ability to see and understand the ethical dimensions of any given problem. Ethics is also the ability to reflect on the issues. It takes time to take difficult decisions and finally to be able to justify the decisions that you make while in the workplace. Furthermore, ethical practice is about working with integrity. There's a word that we do not hear much these days, but it's such an important word in all areas of life. Once again, ethical practice is about working with integrity according to your responsibilities, according to your duties, responsibilities and duties in the workplace. In addition, ethical practice is also about behavior in accordance with professional principles, guidelines, or any rules, policies, or procedures that the agency, or in this case, the residential facility or residential home has. And we all know that there are many rules, policies, and procedures when it comes to working in an environment with youth in crisis. And of course, those ethical policies, those procedures, those rules are all very important on so many levels, including keeping youth safe and keeping the staff safe. Going forward, ethics in the workplace include the behavior of everyone involved in the youth work and youth services. And it must be a standard that makes it the basis of the effective delivery of the services that you provide for these youth at the home. Now, youth workers should treat the young people, the youth you're working with, in a manner that demonstrates respect. Respect for their rights to make choices without any kind of discrimination. Now, let's break this down a little bit further. As you work with youth in the facility, they are going to make choices. Now, we all know that with choices come consequences, of course, but they're going to make choices. Sometimes they might make choices that you agree with. Sometimes they might make choices that you disagree with. Sometimes they might make choices that you think are absolutely ridiculous, if you will. But you need to respect their right to make those choices, whether they're good choices in your mind or bad choices in your mind or opinion. And you have to respect those rights without any kind of, again, discrimination. You don't belittle the youth for making poor choices in your mind. You do not begrudge them. You do not make fun of them, if you will. Again, you respect and you demonstrate that respect for their right to make those choices. Along with this, youth workers such as yourself, when it comes to ethics at the workplace, should always at all times, treat the youth you work with in a manner that demonstrates respect. Respect for the right to make choices, again, without discrimination. And you should be working towards a just society, if you will, within practice principles that involve professional responsibility and accountability. Now, let's consider some ethical dilemmas that might arise. Certainly, as you work with youth in crisis, or in any type of job, if you will, there will be some sort of ethical dilemma, most likely. When ethical dilemmas arise with the youth worker, When they arise, you might face decision making situations that involve a difficult choice between two unwelcome alternatives. In other words, you might have a situation where you have to make a decision between two, in your mind, very poor choices that you know are going to have really poor outcomes, if you will. There will be those times when you work with youth and you've got to make a decision and you understand that the choices you have are not choices that you might choose. Or the choices you have, you might understand that these might not work out the best. But you always are seeking the best outcome, if you will. And as ethical problems arise, you might have difficult situations where a decision has to be made. This is an ethical problem. An ethical problem happens when you have a difficult situation. You've got to make a decision, but it's going to be a difficult time making that decision, if you will. You understand that there's going to be a difficult situation where a decision by you has to be made. And finally, when it comes to ethical challenges in the workplace, there are ethical issues that bring principles into conflict. Now, ethical issues are much more subjective and open to opinions and interpretation. This means your interpretation or your opinion might be different than one of your coworkers when it comes to ethical issues. And this sometimes brings conflict or disagreements, if you will. And we thank the Youth Coalition for these examples of ethical challenges in the workplace. Now, when it comes to working with youth in a foster care system in a residential facility, professional boundaries are so very important. In fact, professional boundaries can sometimes be critical. So it's important that you establish very, very clear boundaries with participants, most likely the youth you're working with. And this helps you to, quote unquote, if you will, foster or create a safe, a supportive environment for the young people that you work with. So once more, it is very important that you establish very clear boundaries with the youth that you work with, because this will help you to create a safer, a more supportive environment for these youth that you work with, as well as for yourself. Now, along with that, professional boundaries are very important if you work with marginalized youth dealing with poverty, gang, violence, drugs in the community, etc. The youth you work with, the youth you're working with today, are very likely have had some relationships with other adults in their life. Adults that were manipulative, or adults that were even dangerous. Adults that have made very, very poor choices, and these poor choices have led to perhaps placing these children, these youth, if you will, into danger. Or these adults might try to manipulate the youth you're working with as well. So again, it's very important that you establish very clear boundaries with youth that you work with who have been marginalized. Again, those youth coming from poverty, gang violence, drugs, etc. It's very, very important that you create those boundaries. And those boundaries are very, very clear. And we'll look into that further. But let's look at what professional boundaries might be according to Laura Beth DeHotry. And she says this, quote, "Establishing healthy boundaries is not easy with high needs children. It often leads to painful conflict. Coming from an environment without healthy boundaries and into an environment with healthy boundaries will rock their world. Neurologically, it changes their brain. It will feel scary and not loving at all. Changes are incremental and slow. So, hold your ground with consistent, loving boundaries." End quote. And there's a lot to be said in that statement. And let's take it apart a little bit here. First of all, it says It might not be easy establishing boundaries with the youth you work with. It could lead to painful conflict. It also states that these youth that you're working with are most likely going to come from an environment where there were no healthy boundaries or any boundaries at all. And now they're in an environment, the home, if you will, where you work, and there are now healthy boundaries. And those coming from an environment where there were no boundaries, now to a place where there are healthy boundaries, is very likely going to cause them even more anxiety. As it says there, it's going to change their brains. And many of these youth are going to feel very scared by these new boundaries, and they're going to feel that they might not be loved by having these boundaries in their home. Finally, what Laura Beth the Hodri says is when you're working with these youth and they're placed in the home and they are recognizing these boundaries, the changes in those youth are going to be very, very slow. So you have to be consistent with the boundaries. Let's look at personal boundaries more. We noted that it's important that you create personal boundaries. And this includes the following: sharing personal information about yourself. Consider how much you share with the youth that you're working with, or how much you say about your own family with the youth you're working with. Because they might take that in some way that could be hurtful towards you. They might manipulate in some way. They might use it against you in some way. It might cause them additional anxiety. In addition, consider the pictures and the photos that you display at your workplace if you happen to have a small office or a workroom. Consider the pictures that you display about your family, about your personal life, and also consider what you post on social media. Because remember this, the youth are going to most likely be following you on social media, seeing what you're doing. It's important for us to remember this. You are an example for the youth that you're working with. You could be the very first positive role model these youth have ever had. So they're going to be watching everything you do and listening to everything you say. Now, sharing personal information can at times be helpful for the teen that you're working with each day, because that might help to build some trust, understanding with them. That might help to build some healthy relationships, if you will. But only share that personal information if it's not about resolving your own issues, or doesn't place yourself or your job or your family in potential harm or potential danger. Now, we do a much deeper examination of personal boundaries at the training webinar, Maintaining Professional Boundaries with Youth in Care. And you can find that here at the Foster Care Institute. And if you've not watched it, I would encourage you to watch that video. Power issues are often part of ethical dilemmas as you work with youth in crisis, and any time you work with youth in general. There may be situations where it puts you in a place of, quote, power, unquote. Now, this power dynamic might be intentional or it might be unintentional. And this power that you're now placed in a position of power, if you will, might even be to compensate for perhaps your own insecurities. And these can create some ethical dilemmas, if you will. So consider the position of power that you've been given and make sure that it has nothing to do with your own problems, your own situations you're finding in life, or it does not compensate for any insecurities that you might have. We hear the word transference a lot in the foster care world. There may be times when you work with youth and teens that it might, either consciously or unconsciously, remind you of people that you may have worked with in the past or maybe even people today. As you work with these youth in crisis, they might remind you of somebody that you know, either the past or maybe current, or maybe somebody you're currently working alongside of. And this is called transference. And this transference might cause you to act more favorably towards that youth, or even more harshly towards that youth without even your knowledge, your understanding. Because that youth might remind you of somebody that you like, or you favor, or you have great feelings towards. And you might act unintentionally, or unconsciously, if you will, more favorably towards them. Maybe the youth reminds you of somebody that you just don't like, that gives you a hard time, that gets under your skin, that somebody you don't want to be around, or somebody in your past that caused you harm or pain in some way. Well, you might unconsciously act more harshly towards that teen. Again, this is known as transference, and this can be an ethical dilemma. There might be events in your past life, that have not been resolved, or have not been resolved that you may have liked them to have been resolved. This is known as unfinished business. I'm sure you're familiar with the term. This unfinished business, these events in your past that may not have been resolved, might lead to situations at work that could lead you to be triggered by these past unresolved events. And this can lead to an ethical dilemma. Perhaps you've heard me say the most relevant issue facing foster care today is that of social media. You and I live in an online world. We use it daily. We're using it right now. But for teens in the foster care system and teens in life in general, teens in society, they inhabit an online world, a world of social media. Again, you and I live in that world while our teens inhabit that world. There's a big difference. Well, social media can include personal information that breaches healthy boundaries that you set with the youth. It can also offer up some information towards the youth or to these youth that they're uncomfortable with, or can allow direct communication, maybe messaging or texting or phone calls, or maybe commenting on posts that exceed the bounds of work that you do with the youth. In other words, you might post something on social media and the youth responds to it that makes you feel uncomfortable or places you in perhaps in jeopardy. They might text you. The youth might text you, and those texts might be some that could be very troublesome, if you will, that could lead to danger or maybe even loss of a job. Again, the dangers of social media are very real, and it could cause or lead to ethical dilemmas if the youth you're communicating with online should exceed the policies, the procedures, the rules at work, and place you in an ethical dilemma. As we know, many youth in foster care have experienced trauma in their lives. So it's very important, in fact, it's essential to approach boundary setting or establishing healthy boundaries with the work that you work with, the youth you work with. It's important that you approach that boundary setting with compassion, with understanding, with empathy. Now, after you have a better understanding of an issue, a problem, a dilemma, if you will, you can show that youth how to identify and trigger and direct them to a healthier way of looking at the problem or situation. And again, we go into more about on this on our previous webinar. So, when we're working with youth in the foster care system, when we're working with youth in a residential setting, and we have these ethical dilemmas, how do we do that? How do we overcome those challenges that those ethical dilemmas might bring? Well, to begin with, we need to make sure that we ask instead of accuse or assume. As you know, accusations and assumptions can very often lead to misunderstandings and to trouble on so many different levels. So when you're working with youth in the foster care system, or maybe even your own fellow staff members, instead of accusing someone of doing something wrong or making assumptions about what they may have done, instead, approach that person with questions about their behavior, questions about their choices, questions about what they may have said, questions about their judgment, and do so in a very kind, polite, pleasant, at the same time, professional manner. Remember, you are the adult, that person is a teen. You have a job to do to help those youth. And there should be a very, very strong separation between the adult and the teen. Now, when you have this conversation, instead of making those accusations, instead of making assumptions, when you approach that person with questions in a very polite, pleasant, at the same time professional manner, well, this can help the conversation from getting out of control, if you will, from becoming heated or from escalating. One way to address ethical dilemmas in the workforce is by brainstorming. When you have a problem, when you need to make a decision, you can help yourself by brainstorming, coming up with ideas, thinking outside the box, if you will. You can brainstorm by yourself. You can brainstorm with fellow workers. You can brainstorm with perhaps your supervisor or manager. And you can brainstorm on alternatives and other options. And you can do so in an unbiased fashion when you're brainstorming with others. Now, when it comes to discrimination in the workforce, it is so important at all times and in every single way to oppose any form of discrimination, to oppose any sort of exploitation or oppression of children and young people, not only where you work, but in all areas of your life, in every aspect of your life. Because the way you live your life sometimes creeps into your work world. So work hard to oppose, to defy, to stand up to all kinds of discrimination, oppression, or exploitation of children and youth. And when you do so, it's going to make your job a little bit easier and more consistent. And it helps to work to better preserve their rights, which is so important. Documentation is so important when it comes to ethical dilemmas in the workforce. Accurate and proper documentation is just not a chore, it's not a duty. It's a very critical piece, or even a cornerstone of professional practice, because it helps to ensure that the youth in care receive the very best care, the very best support services that are possible. So it is imperative, it is absolutely necessary that you properly document, because it not only helps to protect you from false accusations or allegations that might be made by the youth, it also helps you to follow through on agreed upon course of action or policies and procedures in the workplace. Documentation helps with legal practice. It helps with legal protection in case of any legal scrutiny that you might face, or the workplace might face, the residential home might face. Well-maintained documentation, well-maintained records help to showcase that you have been adhering or following the policies and procedures and professional standards, and to help justify any sort of clinical decisions. In addition, documentation helps with ethical compliance. Proper documentation ensures transparency and accountability, and it helps to align with the ethical principles of the social work profession, which of course you are in. Proper and accurate documentation can help by ensuring that all staff members are on the same page, so to speak. You're all in the same direction. You're all doing the same thing, if you will. You're on the same page when it comes to working with youth. And finally, proper and accurate documentation helps to reduce any sense or sort of miscommunication, which can, of course, lead to ethical dilemmas. Now, for much more on documentation, and this is a very important topic, watch a training webinar here at the Foster Care Institute entitled Proper Documentation in the Workplace. Now, keep in mind that ethical situations are an opportunity for you to learn and for personal growth. In fact, we should be learning something new every single day. And ethical situations help you to grow in that learning and, again, professional growth. After a situation has been resolved, the situation has been discussed, there's been an ethical problem of some sort, and after it's been discussed and resolved, take time to reflect on what happened. Ask yourself this: what could have been handled differently? And use these experiences, these prior ethical dilemmas or ethical challenges, to help you improve your approach to future ethical dilemmas. One way to ensure that ethical dilemmas do not happen or do not arise where you work is that you regularly talk with your supervisor on a regular basis about any ethical dilemmas that might occur. When you sense that there's an ethical problem, when you sense there's an ethical dilemma, when you sense that you need to make an ethical decision, talk to your supervisor. Feel free to share your concerns, your thoughts, as well as any and all facts surrounding the situation. There's a very good chance that your supervisor or maybe fellow staff members have faced similar ethical situations. So again, when there's an ethical problem, whether you're in the midst of it, whether you can see it coming, so to speak, schedule time to talk with your supervisor and share all of the information as well as the concerns and thoughts that you have. Now, when you work with youth in crisis, it's so important that you try to look at things from a different perspective and viewpoint. This is the same when it comes to ethical situations or ethical dilemmas. When you are faced with an ethical dilemma, try to look at it from a different perspective and from a different viewpoint. When you try to understand things from a different perspective, including the ethical dilemma, it can help you sometimes find the right balance and the solution. Now, very likely your workplace has training in place in regards to ethics. In fact, it seems that there seems to be more and more ethical training or ethics training, not only in your job, working with youth in a residential facility, but in all jobs today. Now, this training is designed to help you to navigate, respond, and guide you in those ethical dilemmas or situations that revolve around any sort of ethical problem. When you find yourself in an ethical dilemma at work, whether with youth or with fellow staff members, consider leaving. Consider leaving the situation. Consider leaving the room. Consider leaving the area if no one attempts to resolve the situation. Again, if you have an ethical dilemma, not just with the youth you work with, but with other staff members, and no one is trying to resolve the situation in any way, then consider removing yourself from that situation, removing yourself from that area, and then documenting it, and then sharing that information with your supervisor. Now, of course, review any policies and procedures that your workplace has about ethics in the workplace. In fact, it'd be wise if every few months you review the policies and procedures revolving ethics in your workplace. Ask your supervisor to review with you if you have any questions. As noted earlier, seek out guidance and help from your supervisor. Share freely and honestly the situation, your thoughts, your concerns, and learn from your supervisor's insight and learn from your supervisor's experiences that they may have faced in similar situations. We talk a lot about gut feelings. There may be those times when you sense that something might be wrong. Have you ever had that feeling? Have you ever had that feeling in your gut, so to speak, that this is not right? I could be in trouble. This is not the right thing. This is wrong. Well, your gut feeling, your instincts is telling you that something is not right. So it can be very worthwhile, it can be helpful to trust your instincts and any suspicions you have in a situation like this. So take a step back, take a moment, review the situation, and if necessary, remove yourself immediately from the situation and then document it and report it to your supervisor. Again, your gut feeling might be telling you that something is not right. Trust your instincts. Trust your suspicions in situations like this. And then, if necessary, remove yourself from the situation, document it, report it. We all know that value and respect is something that everybody deserves. Sadly, many do not get respect, and many do not feel valued. Value and respect every teen as an individual in his own right, in his role as a member of his family, and in his personal way. When you respect him as a member of his family, in his own way, and in his right, this helps this helps to remove yourself from any ethical dilemma in that regard. In addition, respect the relationship of the teen to his family, his parents, his siblings, other family members, and respect his opinions, respect his values, and respect his beliefs, even if his beliefs are very different than yours, even if his beliefs are ones you do not agree with. Respect his opinions, respect his values, and respect his personal beliefs. Finally, while at work, always strive to maintain personal, professional integrity. Remember, you're an adult, you're working with youth or children, if you will, and you have a professional job to do. Do not overstep that professional job. Do not come down to the level of a child or a youth, removing yourself from any sort of adult responsibilities. Work in a cooperative fashion with your fellow staff members, your supervisors, your colleagues, and contribute to the betterment of the workplace and all who work with youth. In other words, find ways every day to make the workplace a better place, not just for the youth, but for all who work there. When it comes to ethical dilemmas in the workplace, it's very, very important that you are careful and you're vigilant today, tomorrow, next week, this minute, this hour, this day. You must be careful in what you say and what you do and how you respond to others and how you treat others and how you respect others' beliefs at all times. And you must be on the lookout. You must be vigilant, if you will, on those situations that might place you in an ethical dilemma and when you might need to remove yourself from it. For much more, visit the website drjohndegarmofostercare.com or the Foster Care Institute. If you're on social media, follow me at Dr. John DeGarmo, the Foster Care Institute on Facebook, or Twitter at Dr. John DeGarmo for much more about all things foster care. And email me at drjohndegarmo@gmail.com if you have any questions about this webinar or any questions in general that I can be of help to. We have many books at the Foster Care Institute, including this memoir of mine for a time in my life when I lived with many teens in crisis in the Foster Care Institute. It's entitled Love and Mayhem, One Big Family's Uplifting Story of Fostering and Adoption, and I believe it's a book you're going to find very rewarding on many levels, and a book that you probably can relate to as well. And we have many books at the Foster Care Institute. I'm sure there's a book right now that's a great fit for you. I want to thank you. Thank you for taking time to watch this webinar. Thank you for choosing a lifestyle. Again, this is a very different kind of lifestyle. A lifestyle where you make sacrifices of your time, your finances, your health sometimes, as you work with youth in the foster care system, youth who are in crisis. You are doing something that so few will do. There might be those hard days. There may be those hard weeks. There are going to be those hard moments. Please know this. What you're doing is critical for not just the youth, but for all of us. So I say thank you for all that you do for working with youth in crisis and helping them in so many ways. For the Foster Care Institute, I'm Dr. John DeGarmo.